In this video, I'm going to show you a more in-depth example of how to add in the Google Sign-In library to your React project. We're moving past Hello World. I'm going to show you how to use the API from different components on your page, how to make private routes, how to get at the user's information like their email address, their name, and how to sign the user out for the end of their session. Right now, I'm going to walk you through the example app that we built here in React to show you how to add in the Google Sign-In library to your project. In the last video, I just made it based on a Hello World project, but the Hello World project isn't going to tell you how you're actually going to use it in your React application. So I created a sample application that's got a few pages. It will have a login page where the user will click sign in and then get access to a dashboard. So for this example, I'm going to show you what this React app looks like so far. I've got my main application component here, which is just showing the next startup that I'm planning to build, which is an app called BookFace. It's got going to be like a social media gallery of book faces. So if you haven't seen it, you can search for book faces and then you'll see what I'm talking about. You know, I can probably even morph this to be some kind of AI that can automatically like put people's faces next to books. I think that'll be $1 billion idea. So nobody take it. Okay, enough shenanigans. Back here. So we've got our main application component. This is going to be our landing page. This is just who we are and a link to go to the dashboard where you're going to be able to see all your different book faces. So the way that this is set up is we have our render function in our application component. We've got two routes in our application. The first one is the main page here, so it's aptly called landing page. Landing page is nothing else but a container to center everything, the title, a description, and a link. The link will take us over to the dashboard. Dashboard is going to be this component. You can see we have a nav bar. This will be an image picture that we're going to get from my Google profile, and this is going to be my email address that comes from the Google user after I finish signing in, danny@intricatecloud.io. Right now everything's hard-coded here, and then the second part is the actual body of the application. That's what we're stuffing again in container, and it'll have one of the images. Take a look at it. Boom, that's your dashboard. This is MVP. I'm going to go back to the home page. Because as you can see, I haven't implemented sign-in, but I can fake it so far because I've created one property on state called isSignedIn that will tell me whether or not the user signed in. So right now, if I set this to true, I click on go to dashboard and I go to my dashboard. If I set this to false, when I click on go to dashboard, I'm going to be presented with the sign in with Google button. Right now the sign in with Google button is not hooked up, so when I click on it, nothing happens. But let me show you how I've made this happen so far. In my router, I'm using React Router to do this. When we go to the dashboard component, routes have this render property, which can take a function that returns a component. And that component can be dynamically defined. So here we're saying if we are signed in, then return the component that we wanted, which in this case is dashboard. Otherwise, go to the login page. And that's where we are now because this condition is false. So we see the login page. All right, so in order to add in Google Sign In to this app component, I first have to insert the Google API script tag onto the page and then initialize it after that thing has finished loading. So I went over how to do this in my last video, but we can override component did mount and then add the script to the page. So I can do document.create element of type script. I'm going to set the script source equal to the value of apis.google.com js platform.js. I think I've typed it enough times that I remember how to do it. Sorry, that I remember the URL address. And then on load, I'm going to run this dot initialize Google sign in. And then I'm going to add this to the page. New body.append child and append the script. Cool. Now let me create. All right, initialize Google sign-in is not a function, so here we go. Initialize Google sign-in. So here, I'm going to do window.gapi.load. I'm going to load the auth2 library first. And when that loads, I'll do window.gapi.auth2.init. We're going to initialize. And I will set the client ID to, boom, this value. That's my own client ID. So the init method has a callback called then, where it will call this once the authentication library has finished initializing. So this is a good place to do the following. We want to, at this time, right after the authentication library has been initialized, here we want to check if the user signed in. So the gapi library, let's just do it via gapi.auth2.getAuth instance. And from auth instance, there's another method called isSignedIn, and then .get. That is one long line, isSignedIn. And then once that happens, I will call this .setState with isSignedIn. So that will update the value of our state. So if the user is signed in, then we should be able to go straight to the dashboard. And if we're not, we should see the login page. So let's check out what that looks like. I think I've got everything that I need right now. So I've saved, I refreshed. If I go to the landing page, I click on go to dashboard. I'm currently not signed in. I click sign in with Google. Nothing happens because I haven't done anything with that yet. Cool. So that's the next thing I have to implement is the sign in with Google button. So the sign in with Google button is going to be here on the login page. So I will, add the window.gapi.load the sign in to library so that we can render the default button. Window.gapi.signinto.render. What are we going to render? We're going to render an element with the ID login button. And that's all I need to do. So I'm going to change this to be a div, and I'm going to give it that ID login button. Okay. Cannot read property load of undefined. Let's check out what's happening. If I go to the main route, then I click on go to dashboard and I can sign in. But if I refresh the page, I see cannot read property load of undefined. The reason this is happening is because when we refresh the page and we initially go to the dashboard route, the login page component will render before the application component renders on the page. So the app component is responsible for loading the script tag on the page, but this component here needs access to the API once it becomes available. So how are we going to tackle that? What I need the login page component to do is to wait until the application component has already initialized before I actually show the sign-in button to the user. And I can do that by passing in some props and tweaking. I can do that by passing in some props to the login page component and tweaking the initial value of the isSignedIn state property that we have. So I can go over to the app and I'm going to set this to be null. So that'll tell me that the constructor for the app component has been initialized, and that property will bubble down by us saying is signed in. I'm going to pass that over to the login page component. Is signed in. So heading on over to the login page, and this will now accept some props. And I can say if props that is signed in is equal to null, then return checking if you're signed in. Otherwise, just do what you were doing before. Let's see if that gets me out of the jam. Cool. Sweet. That worked. if I refresh the page when I'm trying to access the dashboard, you see that quick flicker of, oh, not yet. You see the quick flicker of checking if you're signed in, but then once that prop updates, because authentication is finished initializing, now we see the sign in button appear. All right, cool. What do we want to do next? Next, I need to make sure I can log in. So I'm going to sign in with my account, intricatecloud.io. I'm going to type in my password. Cool. I signed in, and whoa. Now, this is kind of a good thing, bad thing. Good thing is that I have actually signed in. Bad thing is that I'm not looking at my damn dashboard. So what happens if I refresh the page? If I refresh the page, I do land on my dashboard. Interesting. Let me go to my home page, click go to dashboard. I'm already signed in, so I can see the dashboard. Okay, but can I reproduce that bug from before? I can do, boom, go back. I'm in a new incognito session. I go to dashboard, I click sign in, and I sign in with my info. And again, I'm stuck. Why is that? Well, because the only place where I'm actually using that property, this.state, is signed in is, let's see where we're calling .state. I'm only setting it once after initializing the authentication library. I check it right after and set state there. That's the only usage I have of it. So what does that mean? That means as soon as I finish signing in here, there's nothing that's actually updating the application state to let it know that, yes, the user is actually signed in now. For that, there is another method we'll want to get used to in the gapi.auth2 auth instance library. I'm going to take this out into a variable auth instance. The gapi library provides listeners in the form of isSignedIn.listen. And you can pass this a callback, which lets you know if the user signed in. If the user signs out, you get the callback says false. Once the user signs in, it says true. So here I can say whenever there's been a change to the isSignedIn status, let's just update that value with whatever the new value is. So now I'll know that when the application first loads, I know whether the user has already signed in previously. And if they're not, and they actually do sign in, then I'll know that they're actually signing in now. So when I refresh the page, I should get my dashboard. Boom. Boom, 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 boom. Sweet. So now that I have that working, the last piece that I actually have to update is the nav bar to include my profile picture and my email address. And the most important part, the sign out button. Boom. We're going to get to that. All right, let me update the nav bar. So the nav bar is going to be over in the dashboard component here. I'm going to get at the user's information, the currently logged in user's info. For that, I have to go through window.gapi.auth2.getAuth instance, and I'm going to assign that to a variable auth instance. These are just really long method names, and auth instance is going to have another property called current user, and I will get that user, and then I'll get their information. So I'm going to get their profile info, so I can do user.getBasicProfile. And from their profile, I can get their email address by doing profile.getEmail. And I can get at their image URL by doing profile.getImageURL. All of that's available on the JavaScript client reference from the Google API docs. So, email address I'm going to put here. So I'm going to swap that out with my actual email address. So this will be email, and let's indent you back. And the image of me is going to be an image tag with the source set to image URL. And this needs to be a closing tag there. And I think that about does it here. All right, I'm gonna click save. Let's see what happens. Boom, look at that mugshot. I've got my my icon here in the corner. I've got my email address. And last thing I have to do is add a sign out button, and I'll show you how to sign the user out. So real quick, I realized I have to add the sign out component. So actually I'm gonna do pull in a drop down from React Bootstrap because I have that installed. And I'm going to attach it to my email here. And I believe the way that this works is I'm going to set up a dropdown with a dropdown.toggle. And this will be my email address. And then I have a dropdown.menu with a dropdown.item that says sign out. Let's see what that gets me. All right, I've got one email too many, and I've got the drop down, and I think I can say, just show this as a link. I don't want to see it as a button. Boom! I got my sign out button. Sweet. So, if I want to do something with it, on click. I'm going to set an on click handler to be, I can actually just pass in the function auth instance.signout. You'll notice I'm not going to use the parentheses, so I'm not going to add in that. It's just going to be the actual function. That's where we're going to pass in. So whenever the user clicks it, it will then call the function at that point. So we should be good enough here. So if I do, whoops, this refreshed. All right. If I click sign out, boom, I'm signed out. If I go here to the home page, I can click go to dashboard. I'm not signed in. I click sign in. It logs me in. All my information's here, and I can sign right back out. Whoa. What just happened? I'm supposed to be at the login page. I'm seeing sign in with Google. It's not a button. And this means that there's a small bug because I'm supposed to be seeing the sign in button. All right, here's the issue that's happening. And it's not immediately clear, but see if you can stay with me. The first time that we run through this login page component, we are first checking whether or not we're seeing the initial value of the is signed in status, so that we just show some text saying, we're just waiting for things to load so that we can check whether or not you're signed in. Then it will load the sign in to library. Now, all of these methods that are behind the gapi API, these are all libraries that are pulled in asynchronously. So the first time that this actually happens, it will actually fetch some JavaScript from Google servers to then give us the sign in to library. First, we will try to load the sign in to library, and then we will return the HTML. Then at some point, the library finishes loading, and then we render the button because now there is a button that is on the page that has this ID of login button. When we click sign out, we are already on the page. We have already loaded the libraries that we want. And when we click the sign out button and land back here on the login page, the sign in to library has already run. And this means that these two lines, the second time around, will run one right after the other, which means that when you try to render the sign in button, at the moment that you try to render it, this hasn't gotten onto the page yet. So there's no button to render, which is why we see just the plain text of sign in with Google. All right, so the way that we're going to fix this issue is by converting this from a functional component to a class component. The reason I'm going to convert this login page component over to a class component is because we'll be able to override component.did_mount, which is a callback that will be run after the HTML has already been rendered on the page. So at that point, I can guarantee that whenever component.did_mount is called, the login button already exists, so it's safe to call the signin_to.render function either synchronously or asynchronously. So let's make it a class component. So I'm going to do extends react.component, and let's do give it the props. Oh, actually, I don't think I have to write that. Let's do component.did_mount. So after all the text has initialized on the page, then we will try to render, we'll try to render the login button. And in my render function, I will say this. Cool. So all I did was move this call into component mount, and let's see if that fixes our issue. Props is not defined. Oh, I have to do this dot props. Cannot read property load of undefined. I think what we'll have to do instead is just make sure that the login page component doesn't get mounted on the page before the application component. So I think what we can do is, I think we can get rid of this prop altogether now, because I just want this to return, whoops, one too many. I just want this to return the sign in button, and this isn't accepting props anymore, and I'm going to tell the application to not, I don't need to pass in the assigned in state, so I'm not going to need that here yet. But I can say here, where I'm deciding which one to show, I can say if this is the initial value, so nothing's been initialized on the page, then return just something that says checking if you're signed in ... Otherwise, it will return the component that you actually want to render or the login page. Let's see if that fixes our issue. Boom. Cool. Let's check this out from the top. We've got our landing page. I click go to dashboard. I see the sign in button. I go through the sign in process. I'm already signed in, and I get automatically redirected over to my dashboard. So I can see this. I can get all my user info. I can go over to my name, click the sign up button, and I see the sign in button again. So I can just do that in a loop. Sweet. And I can refresh the page. Either here, I can click sign out and then refresh the page, and we still see everything behaving as it's supposed to. So that's it. Here is a full implementation of a Google sign-in button, including React Router, and having some private routes behind some authentication. All right, so I'm going to make this code available on GitHub. By the time this airs on YouTube, that'll be available at this GitHub link, so that link will be down in the description. So check it out. Hit the thumbs up or leave a comment if this helped you, or if you have any issues while you're going through the process yourself. Let me know how you found integrating Google sign-in button into your React application. I keep on running into issues even while setting up this tutorial, so it's definitely not easy.